Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. In this video today we are going to talk about Companies Act. So this is a series of video lecture where we are going to talk about the Companies Act. Companies Act is a very important part of the law officer examination. So you have to master Companies Act in order to clear the law officer examination, and it will also be useful for you as a law officer if you are into big project finance in banks or financing in banks, or when you are financing or lending to companies. So this is a series of video lectures. You watch it, and there will be 20 videos in this lecture which will be helpful for you to clear your law officer examination. So what we are going to see in this lecture is what is a company. So what's a company, and what's the meaning, and what the 2013 Act actually brought about company as opposed to the erstwhile 1956 Act. Then the structure of the Act. The Act itself contains 470 sections, 7 schedules, and 29 chapters. Then what are the features of a company? Why you wanted to start a company as opposed to going a sole proprietorship or a partnership. And the Salmon, the landmark case, this is the equivalent of Keshavananda Bharati in constitutional law. So the Salmon case, the foundation of company law, and the lifting of the corporate bill. When the companies, the lifting of corporate bill is when a company is doing some shady business, or the general public wants to know who is behind the company, what are the company's activities. Then the concept of lifting of corporate will come into picture. So without further ado, we'll go into what is a company. The meaning, it is simply means an association of persons which is incorporated under the act, which means the Companies Act, with a distinct legal identity of its own. That's a very important point. When you say distinct legal identity, it means that the company is different from its members and directors, etc. So the company itself has a legal persona, which means the company can be sued or the company can sue. And this replaces the companies. This was the most important definition which replaces the Companies Act 1956, modernizing the company law. The structure of the act itself, it contains 470 sections arranged in 29 chapters. It has 7 schedules, which is supplemented by rules and MC Corporate Affairs, Minister of Corporate Affairs notifications, and it is administered to the MCAs, ROCs, NCLT, and its appellate body NCLAT and SIFO, that is Serious Fraud Investigation Office. What are the key features of the company? It has a separate legal identity. Now, like I said, company is separate from its shareholders, its directors, and the company itself is a separate legal identity. So, which means the liability of the company would depend upon the shareholders' initial contribution. It might be example by a company by shares or by company by guarantee. So they have a separate legal identity, which means the company can be sued and the company can sue. So these are very important aspects. So the debts of the company is independent of its promoters or directors or shareholders. So that is very important when it comes to the company's separate legal identity concept. And perpetual succession. So a company keeps on growing. It has a perpetual succession, so which means that a company does not end by death of its promoter or directors or anybody. So the company lives on. Next, the limited liability. This is a very important concept, the limited liability. So the members liability is limited to either based on the shares, initial shares they have given, or the guarantees. And transferability of shares. Remember, the transferability of shares can take place. You can easily transfer the shares. Of course, there were elaborate transfer share forms which was used before. Now, after the electronic and stock market boom, and the dematerialized form of stocks, this has become by a click of a button these days. However, the transferability of shares is another important concept. And like I said, because a company has a separate legal entity, it can be sued and it can sue. And there was a company had a common seal. Now this requirement has been made optional. Instead of common seal, anybody authorized by the company's board along with the company secretary can affix their signature for company's decision making or company entering into contracts, agreements, etc. So the common seal concept will is one aspect where you would come into where you will actually touch upon as a law officer. Now, this is the landmark case, Salomon and Salomon and Co. Limited. This is very similar to something like this has the equivalence of something like a Kesham Nanda Bharati case in constitutional law. Now, if you look at the Kesham Nanda Bharati case in constitutional law, it is one case which turned the constitution on its head. So it's a kind of a case where where it was decided by the House of Lords in United Kingdom. So the Salmon and Salmon and Co. which categorically laid down that once incorporated, a company is a separate legal person. That is, it's distinct from shareholders. And so Salmon and Salmon, like I said, is the landmark case. It is the equivalent of it is the equivalent of Keshavananda Bharati case in constitutional law. And what it said was the company is distinct from its shareholders, distinct from its shareholders who own it, and even including one-man company. So essentially, Mr. Salman was held to be not liable for company's debts. So this is the bedrock of the company law. There must be a corporate veil between the company and its members. So we would see when this corporate veil is actually lifted by the courts. So the lifting of corporate veil, there are statutory grounds. If there is a fraudulent conduct of business, then either the directors or persons who are responsible for the day-to-day functioning of the company can actually be held to be liable for its debts. And there is misdescription of the company's name and the failure to return to application money and reduction of members below the minimum. All these are statutory grounds on which corporate veil can be lifted. And judicially, the courts do have a discretion where it feels that the company is a sham. It is the entire company is set up only to say, for instance, avoidance of tax, money laundering purposes, tax evasions, all these things. The court has the discretion to lift the corporate veil. And the court can also lift the corporate veil for the protection of public interest and revenue. So we have to see who administers the Companies Act. The Companies Act is in essential administered by the MCA, that is Ministry of Corporate Affairs, the apex policy and rulemaking body under the Government of India. Then ROC, the Register of Companies, its incorporation filings in the public register. Then regional directors for each company, for each region, and NCLT and NCLAT, the tribunals where insolvency petitions, relation to companies, and adjudications happen. And then SFIO, that is Serious Fraud Investigation Offices, which investigates corporate fraud. So a quick recap: Companies Act itself is an elaborate over model from the 1956 Act, where 470 sections, 29 chapters, and 7 schedules are made. The company is considered a separate legal entity as per the Salmon and Salmon landmark judgment in House of Lords, United Kingdom. And it has perpetual succession, that the company is not extinguished by the death of its members or promoters. It keeps going on until unless it is liquidated by the relevant IBC provisions. There is a limited liability for the members based on the number of shares or the guarantees, and the transferability of shares is another important concept. The common seal has been made optional after the 2015 amendment, and that the Salmon and Salmon said there is a veil between the members and the company. However, this can be lifted if the company is held as a sham, fraud, tax evasion, and other purposes. So you can test yourself by the question of the principle that a company is a separate legal entity was established in the case of Salmon and Salmon. So this is a very basics of companies law which you must know, which can be asked in the law officers examination. For those of you who's preparing for the law office examination, please share it with your friends. This video would be helpful, and if you are not able to understand any concepts, do drop in a comment. I will read each and every comments and try and clarify it to the best of my ability. Thank you.
and all the best for your examinations.